Hey everybody, welcome back again with another video. This comes from some of my friends here at the channel who made some really good suggestions about what to talk about. This topic on ICOC leadership is also something that I have been meaning to address for a while, but I haven't gotten around to it, so here we are. And so this is going to be one of those topics that's very touchy. It might hit home for some of you because you were in the church and you were in leadership, or it may hit home for you because you were a member of the church and you were on the brunt end of leadership, and maybe you're in the church ministry. But either way, even if you have parents that are in leadership in the church or whatever it is, whether it's you, loved ones, or just observing as an outsider, this is something that might hit home for some of us. And that's not a bad thing, but I just want to prep that it may be a bit of a trigger for certain people. So let's look at the title. ICOC, ICC leadership, making Pharisees one soul at a time. So let's go on to dive into this, shall we? Now this concept of leadership is kind of broad, but I'm coming from an angle of someone who was in leadership and rose up the ranks to leadership. I wasn't at the top of the food chain by any means, but I was in enough leadership meetings and played enough leadership roles in the church to have some experience with this from both sides. And so the reason I say ICOC leadership is basically a Pharisee making machine is because it is. For as much as the church talks about legalism, and that's the term they love to throw around, that you're being legalistic, the system itself of the church, the way it operates, the principles it's based on is nothing but legalistic. The ICOC and the ICC is a branch of the ICOC. So for those of you who don't know, the ICC, or the International Christian Church, is also started by Kit McKeon, who launched the ICOC. So it's basically ICOC 2.0. And these principles that the founder, Kit McKeon, has instilled in the organization is nothing but what you would call legalistic. Kip, I believe, was a military man, and his style of leadership was very much he structured the leadership in the church very much like military in rank and discipline, and the whole concept of the discipling chain came from military leadership. So when you try to mesh that with the doctrine of serving an unconditional God, Christian love, peace, joy, fruits of the Spirit, when you try to merge military leadership with those concepts of the Bible, or the ones that we choose to, adhere to in modern day Christianity, is something that doesn't mesh well. And we have evidence evidence of this by the church and how it operated. We can see all of the many souls that have been scarred, the people who have been permanently traumatized by even just doing some Bible studies from this church, not even joining. And nevertheless, people who actually did join the church, who were baptized, who became members. And then you have people who did those things and went on into leadership. Now, let's discuss how leadership turns people into Pharisees. But first, let's break down a Pharisee. When I'm saying a Pharisee, most of you listening already know what a Pharisee is. But just as a refresher, when I say Pharisee, I mean religious people. It's what the ICOC will always point to Pharisees. And the Pharisees were the religious men of Jesus' day in the Gospels, in the New Testament. And these Pharisees were the spiritual leaders of that particular time, who were held in high regard, who were quote unquote legalistic. They followed the letter of the law of the spiritual texts that were at the time, because there was no Bible as what we call the Bible now. That didn't exist, but they did have rules that what they call the Torah today. So they held to the Old Testament teachings down to the letter. But you remember in the Gospel stories, Jesus always had heat for the Pharisees and the Sadducees too, but the Pharisees were the ones that were always trying to catch Jesus in a trap. Jesus was someone who was acting from his heart. He was showing love to people. He was healing. He was theoretically showing the heart of God to humanity. And the Pharisees were correcting him, saying that he wasn't obeying the law. And basically, they follow all the rules with no heart. Now that we know what Pharisees are, let's switch over to why I say the ICOC leadership makes Pharisees. It's the same principle that the ICOC, they don't operate from the heart, and the ICC as well. These rules that you have to do. Now, the rules of the Pharisees in the Bible were different than the ones that you have to hold to in the ICOC day. Now, when I was in the church, and I'm sure from what people tell me, this is still the case right now. But when I was in the church, there were so many unwritten rules, things that were not in the Bible, but you were expected to obey if you were to be considered a spiritual person. And of course, this is yet again another point of hypocrisy in the church, because they always claim to just be purist when it comes to the Bible. Keeping it simple and having, being obedient to the scriptures, as they say. But then turn around and have all of these unspoken rules for the members that were supposedly, well, let me say it this way. These rules had no scriptural verse in the Bible that stated these things, but they just infer a lot of things from Bible verses, right? And that's a whole other conversation. But the point here is that when you come into the church, certain people that are picked out for leadership. Leaders in the church are pinpointed early on, like when you're studying the Bible, when the leaders of the church are already salivating because they're looking at this person and they're saying, this person is going to be right in leadership. And they can tell right away. And the reasons they could tell were pretty standard across the board. Number one, the person was, they were sharp. And I did a video on sharp people. If I remember, I'll link it at the end of the video. But sharp people were these ideal prototypes that were basically ambassadors for the church. They were brand ambassadors for the church. They looked a certain way. They dressed a certain way. They were people who were in good standing with society, so they fit the ideal prototype for a good-looking person, a person who doesn't have any disabilities, who doesn't have any visible markings of challenge, like just a person that essentially would fit the same way Hollywood would look for celebrities. It's the same way the ICC look for leaders. And so you can tell a particular person who's studying the Bible, and like, yeah, they're going to go right into leadership. They're going to shoot right into the ministry. And let's say you're studying with someone, and when I was on campus, I knew somebody, I'll be studying her, and the women's ministry leader would be so excited because she'd just be gushing, because this particular person was the president of the student board. You know, they were the captain of the hockey team. You know, they held these positions, so they said, oh, this person is a person of influence. And so they definitely wanted that person to go into leadership. But the second ingredient for leadership material was and is a sense of eagerness and openness. The easier a person took to the programming of the church, the more eager they were in terms of getting together for Bible studies, the more of an enthusiastic church member they wanted to become. Made them completely eligible for leadership. So if they're sharp and they're completely open, that's what we used to call it, someone that is a go-getter and who was open to becoming a member. In reality, they were open to the cult indoctrination, and that the indoctrination was taking hold very well. Then that's the kind of person that ended up going into leadership. And I know because I was that person. I was that person that was so enthusiastic. I mean, I was all in. And people who are all in with both feet, the church calls it being radical for God. They call it being open or super open. A person who has a soft heart, a humble heart, that person they want for leadership. And that's the kind of person that ends up going into leadership. I'll try and remember to link my video that I did previously on how to become a leader in the church, because that still holds true. And I talked about things that you have to do to get in good standing with the leadership. And the thing with leadership and how it turns you into a Pharisee, because a lot of people, many of you can relate to this. You went into leadership with high hopes. You really thought you were going to make a difference. You really felt special because the church, you don't apply for leadership in the ICOC when I was there. And of course the ICC, right? For those of you who are in the ICC. But I remember being in the ICOC, leadership wasn't something that you applied for. Leadership was this elite honor that was bestowed upon you. It was a privilege. It was actually called being lifted up or raised up. They would say, I'm raising so-and-so up to be in leadership. So you were being raised up. And now, as I talk about this, you have to think about what that means, even the term being raised up, because that creates this. It creates this sense of elitism in the church, like this social hierarchy. Just like in our society, we have these hierarchies of people who are the common people and people who are considered the 1%, or the plutocrats, or the elites, right? And the church is not supposed to be like the world. And the ICOC, when I was there, always bragged about not being like the world. But they were exactly like the world in many ways. And this way was especially true. So being raised up in the leadership was the equivalent of moving up the corporate ladder. If you work in corporate America, let's say you work for a Fortune 500 company, and you working your way up from the mailroom to the boardroom. And that's how it was treated. That's how it was. You were in the mailroom, so to speak, if you know, when you were born and you're a so-called baby Christian, and except for those plucked for leadership, people who jumped out of the baptism, they were all in. They were just completely sold out. And those were the cult members with the highest zeal. And you get rewarded for that zeal. To a point. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. But you were rewarded with being raised up in the leadership. It was a privilege, it was an honor, it was a glory, and it made you feel like, if I'm honest, you felt like you were closer to God when you were being raised up in the leadership. You felt like you were doing God's work, that you felt more spiritual, as treated as the higher up in leadership, the more spiritual you are. The higher up in leadership, the more of a servant you are. The higher up in leadership, the more God favors you, the more pleasing you are to God. Because the church is extremely performance-based. It's very based on performance. And, you know, they've tried to rebrand themselves and say that they're really about grace, but the culture makes them out to be a liar every time. And this isn't just about the ICOC, right, or the ICC, or the Boston movement, for those of you who were in that back in the day. Any church that does this, any group that is like this, is a red flag that should be avoided. It should be, you know, it should be left immediately. But this leadership machine, because it was like this big machine. It's like Hollywood. It's like the machine. It sucks you in, you know, the glamour of leadership in the ICOC. I mean, the leaders in the church were like rock stars. The they were seriously on this pedestal. And I just remember that when I was studying the Bible and I was going through the studies, and I just remember the girls and how the girls who were studying with me, and how they talked about the leaders. You have to meet so-and-so. She's amazing. She works here. She does this. She's phenomenal. And their eyes would glaze over. And it was just so much admiration. It was really idol worship, more so. It was really the programming, but at the time, it just seemed like these people were rock stars. I just remember even feeling that way, being around the top leaders. And as a woman, being around the women's ministry leader, the women's sector leader, the woman, the elder's wife, the zone leader's wife, the deacon's wife. Like I remember being in a lot of these women's presence and feeling a sense of awe and a sense of intimidation just being around them. Like they just were these super spiritual women in my eyes. And that's how you're taught to view these people. So, of course, a lot of people desire that. You want to be admired. You want to be... there's the ego and there's the heart. And the ego wants to shine and the heart wants to serve. They want to serve God. You go into it, you want to be, you just want to be, you just want to do the best you can to be a good Christian and to follow the Bible and all that stuff. So, and the ICOC, when I was there, they really did a my job on you during the indoctrination process, because you come into the church because it's such a performance-based environment that then they tell you that scripture, you have to work your salvation out with fear and trembling. You always feel like you're not doing enough. You always feel like you have to do more, that God is never satisfied, that God is a hungry monster that has to be fed. And to keep yourself saved, you have to keep doing good works. And so leadership was the ultimate way to do that. And of course, like I'm saying, leadership was on a pedestal. And that's why it was such a big deal when someone would moved from leadership. It was almost like someone died. It was this sense of shock and heartbreak when someone gets asked to step down because they quote unquote fell into sin or what have you. And it was just such a big deal. And so I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I think leadership, if people are going to hold leadership, they should have an honorable responsibility. They should feel compelled and to be an example and to do their best for people who are looking and following. But the ICOC, when I was there, they took it way too far. And the ICC, I've heard horror stories. And this leadership concept is vast. And I don't know if I should do a part 2, so this video isn't too long. But if you made it this far, I appreciate it. So, but this leadership concept is, I have a lot of different memories from being in leadership. There were a lot of things that I saw behind closed doors. There were a lot of emotions I had from the pressure, because there were many moments where I was asked, or more like commanded, to do things that went against my common sense or my conscience. And that was a real struggle for me. I mean, I'm a leader. I'm a natural leader in my personality, and it was always a challenge for me taking orders in the sense of how it was in the church. And so there's this double-edged sword as a leader. You feel very honored to be chosen to be in leadership because you're part of this elite group. But then the other side of that a lot of the members in the church didn't see, who weren't in leadership, they didn't see the abuse. And everyone in the church was abused. And across the board, it was the spiritual abuse, the mental abuse, the psychological abuse, and the manipulation, the violation of boundaries. All of that took place across the board. But one thing I found out, and if you're in leadership in the church, you know this, and that is that the higher you go in leadership, the more abuse you get. So on the outside, it looks all shiny and good and and glory. Other people look at you. You're this leader. You're this super disciple. You're the spiritual person. The evangelist uses you as an example in the sermons on Sunday of how to be. All of that. And all of that looks shiny on the outside. But behind the curtain, you're miserable. Behind the curtain, you're barely holding it together because there's so much pressure on you to compromise your principles and to work yourself to death. The thing is, a regular member of the church has tremendous pressure. They have to come to service on Sunday. They have to come to all the ICOC or ICC events, which, depending, pre-COVID pandemic, was bunch of stuff a week. I mean, in a week, you can go to about 5 or 6 events. It was just unbelievable the time suck that on your schedule. So let's say a member would have to come. You go to Sunday service, you come to midweek service, you go to Friday devotional, and that might be it. And of course, they're expected to be sharing their faith with people. You're expected to be asking people to study the Bible. And you're expected to lead Bible studies with these people and sit in Bible studies, which is another set of time that you have to, put aside. Then you're expected to serve. So that can be babysitting the married children or a single parent's children in the church. It can be getting to church early, spending a couple of extra hours, teaching children's ministry. It could be a vast number of things, is my point. Now, if you're a leader in the church, you have to do all of that, but multiply it tenfold. So not only do you gotta be at church on Sunday, but it's a definite, if you're in leadership and in a ministry capacity, you are teaching children's ministry or teaching teen ministry. You are serving on the usher committee, communion. You're in the music ministry. You're song leading, or you're in a choir. Like, you've got, as a leader, you are expected to be more involved in church functions, to be more of a servant, as they say, than the average member. So where the average member can get away with just coming to church on Sunday and sitting in the back row, if you're a leader in the church, if you're in D group, if you are in, ministry, you have to come to church and you are expected to sit in the front row, or the first 3 rows. You have to sit in the front. You have to be, you can't have this time where you're being inward focused, as they say. You need to be singing the loudest. You need to be smiling while you're singing. You need to be pulling other people into the singing. And you need to be having your quiet time every day. And it needs to be spectacular quiet times. You need to be, you always have to be more spiritual than the regular member of the church. You have to be an example. You have to, all these things. It's all these things that you're supposed to be. And so that is where all the pressure comes from. If the average member is spending 20 hours a week on ICOC or ICC stuff, you're spending 30. And not only that, so on Sundays, when the average member would go home after church or they go to lunch, as a leader, we would go to the evangelist house for discipleship group, or what we call D group, which was the leadership group. And these, depending on what ministry you're in, it could be all the Bible talk leaders in that region, all the zone leaders. I mean, my ICOC church was more of a mission team church, so we were very small at that time. So it was just all the people who were in leadership across the board coming to these meetings, the men and the women. So by the time Sundays was like a 9 to 5 event, when you had to deal with D group, and not only that, but the evangelist and his wife had children, so we had to find people members of the church each week who would be willing to come babysit. It's just a lot that goes into it. It's just a lot, and you spend money traveling there to these meetings and all the time. And I remember being in school and Sundays being this long day. And by the time I get home, it's like 6 o'clock at night. Sometimes after D group, it'd be a Bible study schedule. And the women's ministry leader would tap me and say, hey, I need you to sit on the study. So then that's another couple of hours. And you're a leader. You don't really get to say no. You're really, supposed to say yes. And that's the irony too. The church always criticizes people for people pleasing. But that's part of the culture, is you really are people pleasing, because if you say no to something, then you're perceived as not being spiritual, or you're going to get corrected as not being dedicated to seeking and saving the lost, not being after God's heart, all these things. So the people pleasing comes with the leadership package. And that's why so many people burn out, because it's just so taxing on you. It's so much pressure, and you feel like I have to be perfect, And the thing is with the ICOC, how they operate is, how if you're a member of the church, how you get yelled at and discipled hard. I talked about breaking sessions before in other videos. But you think those breaking sessions are bad. When you're a leader in the church and the higher up you go, the breaking sessions get worse and worse. They get more hardcore. They get more, because they feel like it's like a military style of leadership, as I said before, how it is built into the church. So, if you move up the ranks, you're supposed to be harder. You're supposed to be able to take more criticism. You need to be able to take it to the face, because more is expected of you. and to who is giving more and more is expected. So they really are harder on you as a leader. You don't get any room to be human. And that's why so many people crack. That's why so many people burn out. They get sick. They get chronically sick. I was one of those people. And it becomes too much. So this is what's behind the curtain of leadership in the church. And one last thing I'll say is, I'll give you one example in my life where I was asked to compromise, because you've got this pressure on you from the person who's higher ranking than you. And sometimes they would ask you to do things that went against what you knew was the right thing. And a lot of times, if we're honest, we did that. We obeyed orders, or we kind of halfway obeyed it and tried to, do just enough to ease the pressure off of us. So one of these situations for me, I was discipling a young woman in campus ministry, and I was getting this pressure from the women's leader. I'm in leadership, I'm in D group, and I just remember this particular young woman, came out of the teen ministry from a different church. And so she was very independent. And in the church that meant, she did what she wanted, pretty much, in terms of, the church had all these rules, right? When you were in campus, you should basically only hang out with the church members, because everything else is pretty much sinful. And she went to different social functions. She wasn't caught up in that. And she had a mind of her own. And of course, this is a problem in the church. So the women's leadership chewed me out. I mean, I really took it. I really took a lot of heat, because she thought I wasn't being hard enough on this girl, and I needed to, she said I need to crack the whip on this girl. So there was a particular weekend where we had our discipling time, and this young woman told me that she was going to a rap concert that was being held on campus. And this particular rap artist was off the chain. I mean, you knew it was going to be raunchy, and there was going to be all kinds of debauchery at this thing. But she told me she was going to go. And I said, oh, okay. And the woman's leader, I don't know how she found out that this young woman was going to the concert, but I think because, when you disciple, you have to report everything that they tell you to the leadership. So I was probably in D group reporting. And so the woman's leader calls me up, and it goes off on me. And she says, you pick up the phone right now and you call her and you tell her that you forbid her to go to this concert. And I was like, and I'm thinking, as you're probably thinking, are you serious? I'm sorry, I forbid you to go to a concert? It's like, really, this is just comical at this point. But she put so much pressure on me, that I tried it. I actually picked up the phone and I called this girl and told her what the woman's leader said to tell her. And to her credit, she didn't snap off on me or nothing, and if she ever hears this video, shout out to you. I hope you're doing good in life. I really liked you. You were cool. If you weren't in the church, we'd be cool. So I hope, I didn't traumatize you, too much. But, I was trying to obey, leadership. So I called, and told her this, and she was just real quiet. And she was like, uh-huh. And she said, well, I'm going to go, though. And I can't remember, that was basically it. She's like, yeah, I'm just going to go still, though. And I didn't end up pressuring her anymore, I don't think. I just went, I was ordered to call back the women's leader after I talked to her. I told her, she said she's going to go anyway. And the woman's, you could just see the smoke coming through the phone. Because I had failed my mission to get this girl under control. But the idea, that went against my own conscience. I really violated my own conscience. It's like, me, real me, would never do that to another person. And tell someone, like, the audacity, like, who am I? The real me. This is the real me talking. But back then, it's like you're in this cult, you're under this control, and you feel like you have to please your leaders. It's like the military, you have to obey orders. And these are the types of things that you have to deal with in leadership. And I'm sure that some of you have worse stories than that. But the worst stories are when you do that to people and they listen and they fold. And that, unfortunately wasn't the case with this young woman. Of course, she was seen as a weak Christian and quote unquote eventually fell away, I think. But that's life in the ICOC ministry. And that's what turns you into a Pharisee, is that you become about listening to, following the rules, listening to what the people above you want you to do. And this whole concept of I'm just obeying the Bible really goes out the window. Now, my feelings about the Bible being legitimate is a whole other conversation, but in terms of following the basic tenets of, love, peace, joy, loving each other, and all the principles in the Gospels, the ICOC leadership fell way short of that. And it was very hypocritical. It actually turned leaders into the Pharisees that Jesus was against, the ones that he lambasted, the ones that he told off. And he put on front street and rebuked them. We became those Pharisees. Because this girl going to a rock concert had nothing to do with Jesus or the Bible, but it was about control. And what we thought was righteous and what the church thought was righteous, and what we think you should do, what you shouldn't do, and how it makes the church look and all that stuff. And so that's what it turns you into, this religious person. And everyone knows someone who came up in the church and they were a normal person or a nice person, and the higher they got in the leadership, it's like they had a lobotomy. It's like their personality completely changed, and they became cold, they became judgmental, they became arrogant. And leadership does that to you in the church. It does that to you. You become someone, if you let it. It can make you into a completely horrible person who, especially, is judgmental. And that judgmentalism comes from the pressure you get from the leaders of the church. That you have to not only police yourself, but you have to police the people that you're leading in the ways of the church, and to quote unquote follow the scriptures, and to be righteous, and to be a good disciple. And so that pressure to police other people is what makes you, one, it makes you not fun to hang around. And it makes you someone that is always analyzing, always looking, because you have to report in discipleship group how everyone's doing spiritually. So you're always analyzing people and judging, if they're doing well spiritually, and so it just turns you into this Pharisee, the Pharisee, because that's what the Pharisees were. They were good disciples. Just like the church says you're good disciples, you are a strong disciple. That's what the Pharisees were. And so that is how leadership in the ICOC and ICC makes disciples, one soul. This is how they make Pharisees, one soul at a time. Until next time, we'll speak again.